Hey, what's good? What's good? It's your brother Yanga. Haven't been with you in the second couple of days, giving everybody an opportunity to observe their Labor Day the way that they would observe it. I hope that it was blessed, prosperous, joyous, wonderful, whatever good thing that it could have been for you. I hope it was exactly that. So now we're back. We're back with political education committee, giving it, or the People's Education Committee, delivering them to the people. Last I had left you, of course, we were coming from the works of Dr.Muhammad Ahmad, awesome individual, formerly known as Maxwell Standford of the Revolutionary Action Movement, R.A.M. If you're not up on the Revolutionary Action Movement, stay tuned. Log in with your boy Yanga, look for more political education because that will eventually come up in the whole process of educating the people. Also, you can go back and check out the developments of the Panthers. I'm quite sure I need to finish it up, but I believe we have a couple parts in a series of the various developments of the Panthers. Go back and check that out, man. Brush up on your thing and find out where we came from, where we're at, and what we're trying to get to. When last we talked, like I said, I left you. We were talking about the Black intelligentsia, and the contradictions and the things within the Black intelligentsia, some of the issues that come up amongst us that can be used as viable solutions. One of them was militancy versus moderation, revolution versus reformism, so on and so forth. Two of the, or some of the Black intelligentsia that came out and that had emerged as leading what we would call Black intelligence, Black leadership at that time was Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois and the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. The last part we talked about, the debate between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Now we'll talk about, and that was called the Great Debate. Now we'll talk about the second major debate, or the second great debate. Dr. Muhammad writes, the second major debate occurred in the 1920s between Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois. It was over the concepts of integration versus separation and revolutionary reform integration versus revolutionary reform nationalism. It's important. Let's take a moment to look at what this debate is about, because we see reformism being pushed before us all the time. But even then, and I'm not even going to say even then, like they didn't know what was going on, but it shows the level of study. It shows to what depths that they would go to in exploring solutions for the problem of millions of Black Africans here in America, and how intelligent they were at exploring different concepts, ideologies, and philosophies. They didn't just say reformism or revolutionaryism. They knew exactly what specific ideology or form that it must take if it was going to be potent, if it was going to be effective. And in many instances, and we find one of the more moderate Black heroes, if you will, that I like to point out there is our dear brother El-Haj Malik Shabazz, more commonly known as Malcolm X, as being one who really showed us how to be innovative in putting ideologies together that best suited the situation of Black Africans here. But here we find this type of dedication. So it shouldn't surprise us that Malcolm had that, because we see his predecessors possess the same, I don't want to say ability, but possess the same seriousness, the same attention to detail, knowing the gravity, knowing how important it was for us to understand the ideology we embraced. So it says the second major debate occurred in 1920s between Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois. It was over the concepts of integration versus separation and revolutionary reform integration, versus revolutionary reform nationalism. Garvey's position was the building of African-American businesses and capturing parts of the national African-American market. combined with the concept of the eventual return to Africa. While Garvey sympathized with some of the goals of socialism, he had faith in the capitalist system and the illusion that he could establish an African empire. Listen. So we hear Garvey's position, and Garvey's position was revolutionary reform nationalism. Garvey's was positioned, and that you find the nationalism in Garvey's position of building African American businesses and capturing parts of the national African American market. See, there you hear the economic nationalism. There you hear that. And it says with the concept of the eventual return to Africa. There you hear the repatriation or the separation. But in this nationalism, you hear Black capitalism. So Garvey was a Black capitalist. You know, I have that told to me all the time. Hey, well, Garvey was a Black capitalist. How do you promote and how do you, because I'm not that type of, like I tell people, when you have to understand, I think that is foolish for Black people to subscribe totally to one ideology without understanding, especially like when you hear things, and we'll read later, like Du Bois advocating what was largely prominent in the Black community was socialism, as Marxist-Leninists understood it, and it was propagated to our people. You know, I think just blindly adhering to anything has shown us that there are disastrous results and consequences, as well as this faith in the capitalist system. Garvey showed me that the collectivism, the communalism, the recognizing the greatness of Black people, the reconnecting to Africa, just recognizing that within us is a nation, and inspiring and motivating us to bring that out and to manifest that in real, tangible, practical ways. I thank Garvey for, and I also thank him for the hard code lesson in capitalism, that playing in a system that they control will meet your destruction, as it did the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, and he was brought down through instruments and tools that were manipulated within and by the capitalist system. So it said, while Garvey sympathized with some of the goals of socialism, he had faith in the capitalist system and the illusion that he could establish an African empire. Du Bois objected to Garvey, not because of his concepts of returning to Africa, but because he de-emphasized agitation in the U.S. You see? So Du Bois, their disagreement wasn't about Garvey returning to Africa. It wasn't about repatriation. It was about the lack of agitation against the U.S. Garvey also opposed the concept of cultural pluralism, the mutual respect and coexistence of various cultures integrated into the same state. Multiculturalism is what I call it, but multi-pluralism, that we all can, we got these multicultures going on, and we can all coexist and be integrated in the same state and all work for the betterment of the state being that nation or whatever, and that your culture can exist like America professes to promote. But we see what happens when your culture isn't substantiated, isn't backed with real political power, isn't backed with economic power, isn't backed with the physical ability to protect your social cultural institutions or ways of life. Your culture gets gobbled. Your culture gets gobbled. And your culture being very insignificant to these people, your culture becomes what your culture becomes at that particular time is just a springboard to advance them. Your culture is a consumer culture, so they market things to you. They'll rap in their commercials, and they'll break dance, and they'll do all the buffoonery, which those things I don't call buffoon. I know what they were birthed out of. I know the real pain and struggle and toil and the sacredness of those arts, graffiti and break dance. Those things are an art, but when they're sold to other people, they become clownish, and buffoonish is what we call commercialized. It's exactly what they become. They become commercialized. So this is what you have, and this is what our culture over here has become to represent to them a step up their economic ladder. So when you mix culture, this multi-pluralism, this multiculturalism, you must have when you're sitting at the table with other coaches, you must have a strong culture substantiated. You must be able to, at the very least, know that your culture is inoculated enough from certain influences from the outside. Our culture, we're not tight enough. We're not solid enough. This is why I'm a black nationalist and I push black nationalism. Because until we get tight enough, until we get solid like that, we always run the risk of sitting at the table with other coaches and ingesting, digesting, engulfing their culture and aspects of their culture that are not always advantageous for Black Africans here in America. So, kudos for the boys on being that. Garvey also opposed the concept of cultural pluralism, the mutual respect and coexistence of various cultures integrated into the same state. Garvey favored a separation of the races and did not believe that the race question could be peacefully resolved in the U.S. Therefore, advocated a separation of African Americans to Africa. Garvey also advocated that African Americans control their own community, forming a nation within a nation with a semi-autonomous African American capitalist economy with the political objective of the liberation of Africa. That's deep. Okay, wow. Thank you for being patient. So we're looking here that Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, and especially at this time, this is a thing we're calling primitive black nationalism, right? So the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey recognized and was encouraging African Americans to recognize that they're a nation within a nation, and it starts with community control, where we find ourselves in the majority, with a semi-autonomous African American capitalist economy with the political objective of the liberation of Africa. So that's what I was talking about, like with the co-ops, understanding that we exist in a capitalist country. Therefore, we are under the functions, the reward and the penalties of a capitalist system. This is how you will move. But how do, and so that's the facts of it. That's the facts of it. Don't let anyone draw you into these vain conversations where you're living a da. Foolishness. So, okay, we live in a capitalist country. How do we minimize the damage of racial capitalism that America practices and our practice of consumer capitalism and maximize it by practicing Ujamaa, by practicing collective or cooperative economics? How do we begin to create a system that is semi-autonomous, meaning that, yes, the largest system, we're engulfed, we're dependent on that, but within our understanding, within this nation, within the communities we control, how do we maximize the effect of that? And that's what the Honorable Marcus Messiah was arguing. The argument was over tactics on the national and international level. Also, what was the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey advocating? He was teaching at this time in this form of Black nationalism, separation in the form of repatriation, that in this semi-autonomous capitalist economy, in this economy that we have created, that we build from, that the ultimate goal be the liberation of Africa, the restoration of Africa, peoples to Africa, and end to the exploitation, the robbery and rape of Africa's minerals, resources, and most precious resources being her peoples. And even though they're not physically robbing and stealing from Africa's sons and daughters, they are still doing this through the criminal process of colonialism. So the argument was over tactics on the national and international levels. Garvey favored revolutionary tactics internationally, liberation of Africa by force if necessary. This is what Garvey favored, and was attempting to organize an army to liberate Africa. A lot of y'all didn't know that, did you? Garvey favored revolutionary tactics internationally. Those revolutionary tactics being the liberation of Africa by force if necessary, and was attempting to organize an army to liberate Africa. Y'all thought the Black Legion, the Legionnaires under the Universal Negro Improvement Association, African Community League, was just there for show? That the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey had grand designs, had grand plans for a grand people. And in understanding these grand plans, understanding in what it would take once we build these institutions to bring out of us what was innate in us. Hey, free spirit, what was innate in us? Once we understood that we need very real protection against those people who would come destroy that. Wall Street, Black Wall Street is proof of that. And the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey was such a Pan-Africanist, such a lover of Africa, and a believer in every people must have their homeland, that he was trying to organize an army to go free Africa from colonialism and criminal settler colonialism, if necessary. He formed a provisional African government in exile, but refused to agitate for social change within the U.S. This was Du Bois' problem with it. Though he had this African government in exile, Du Bois, and was agitating for change across seas, Pan-Africanism, Du Bois was like, you are not putting enough pressure, you are not applying enough torque, to it to put enough pressure on U.S. policies or the condition of the Black man and woman here in America. Du Bois, at this point in his career, believed that racial inequality in the U.S. could be solved through agitation against segregation and through securing the vote and support of the liberal wing of the capitalist class. So what is Du Bois' position? Du Bois, at this point of his career, believed that racial inequality in the U.S. could be solved through agitation against segregation, which is simply saying radical reform integration, and through securing the vote and support of the liberal wing of the capitalist class, radical reform integration. The integration and the radicalism is the agitation and organizing against segregation. You want to be integrated. The reformism and the radical reformism is fighting for your political rights, your right to vote, and believing that you can win over the liberal wing of the capitalist class to ensure or to bring about or to fix racial inequality. Now, looking back at this, we have, like you always hear me say, the luxury of hindsight. We have the luxury of looking back, and we can, puff our chests out if we so wish to be that arrogant, you know. But if we look at it objectively and remove ourselves from it and look at it historically, and as good students as we should learning lessons, we find that this is actually a bold idea and it doesn't seem that far-fetched. I could almost see if you're right here understand get it, receiving the bombardment of this white man, and you're reading these fine words of the Constitution, you're reading these fine words of the Bill of Rights that are very revolutionary in their inception, very revolutionary generally, but you see this devil doing what the devil does, and that's being a hypocrite and a liar, being able to steal, I'm not even going to say create such elegant words, but be able to steal, to plagiarize such elegant words and be able to mimic, repeat, or regurgitate such elegant words, but it's not in their nature to live and enact those very words when you talk about that being amongst all human beings, all ethnicities on the planet Earth. The white man has proven to be incapable of such a feat of benevolence. So I think that there were some of us, in the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey in his travels, had come to understand the very nature of this devil, had understood that the devil could not grasp that wisdom, though they could parakeet it. They couldn't grasp it to the degree that they could see allowing all human beings to live under that philosophy that you find in their writings: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, but inalienable rights by the creator type of thing. It wasn't in them. So some people had seen this, and Du Bois believed that they could, racial inequality could be fixed by changing the political process, receiving the right to vote. Du Bois, whose Pan-Africanism had preceded Garvey's, wow. Du Bois was a Pan-Africanist before Garvey, or had introduced or been given or been a proponent or spokesman of Pan-Africanism before Garvey. So it says Du Bois, whose Pan-Africanism had preceded Garvey's, was petitioning the European colonial and imperialist powers for the right of self-determination in the African colonies. Wow, they keep knocking me off. Must be teaching today. Give thanks. So, okay, the Garvey-Du Bois debates of the 1920s had a haunting legacy for the debates that reoccurred much later in the 1960s between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Elijah Muhammad, Robert F. Williams, and Malcolm X. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. advocated nonviolent civil disobedience against the system of segregation, voting rights, racial equality, and in the last years of his life, resistance and economic inequality, Poor People's March, Memphis garbage workers strike. So now we go into, because we're still talking about Black intelligentsia. And what I love about here is that advancement and growth. They as because they believe as we believe, but they have contributed to our ideological awareness and growth, if not advancement in particular areas. Okay, I'm back with you guys. So, Dr. King's philosophy, much like W.E.B. Du Bois that we had read earlier, was that of, and it's almost radical integration. It wasn't just integration, it was radical integration. You have to understand that the nonviolence, we always hear about nonviolence. Dr. King was nonviolent. See, there again, an attempt of revisionists, these devils, to rewrite your history and to even teach you about Dr. King. Yes, he was nonviolent, but what comes after the nonviolent aspect of Dr. King? He was an advocate of civil disobedience. So he was nonviolent, but he still believed in resistance. In that form, they have you think nonviolent, nonviolent. No, he practiced direct action, civil disobedience. They broke the law, not majorly. I guess they didn't try to commit felons. They weren't out maiming and murdering people, much like their white counterparts, you know, these yahoos and these crackers. No, they practiced civil disobedience and direct actions by, they wouldn't leave the lunch counters. They would sip out of the white fountains. They would go into areas that colored folk shouldn't be in. So that's what they don't, they just teach you the nonviolent, but there was civil disobedience and direct action. This contrasted greatly with Elijah Muhammad, who advocated unarmed self-defense, racial separation, and the formation of an African-American state, an African-American religious eschatology, the building of African-American businesses, and a political non-involvement in trying to change the political and social system. That's a lot. This is what the Nation of Islam, under the leadership of Elijah Muhammad, was advocating. Let me reread it again. He advocated, Elijah Muhammad advocated unarmed self-defense, racial separation, and the formation of an African-American state, an African-American religious eschatology, the building of an African-American businesses, and political non-involvement in trying to change the political and social system. I'm not going to touch that. Both Robert F. Williams and Malcolm X tried to develop a synthesis between King and Muhammad's ideology and develop an alternative. They tried to, Robert F. Williams and Malcolm X tried to develop a synthesis. They tried to develop that thing between both of the two. Dr. King's involvement in politics, Dr. King's radical reformist involvement, believing that if Black people involved in politics and involved themselves from the point of what was in the best interest of Black people or the advancement of Black people. I will give Dr. King that. I do believe he fought what he believed was for the advancement of Black people. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, his philosophy of self-determination, his philosophy of Black nationalism, doing for self, was a call that Malcolm heard to, because this was a call that was familiar. We got to understand, I don't want to go into all of Malcolm's history right now, but you understand who Malcolm's father was. So Malcolm was familiar with the teachings and the philosophy and the energy of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA, under the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. Earl Little, Malcolm's father, was a preacher and a teacher, a member of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. So this had been in Malcolm. So by the time that Reginald and everyone, his brothers and his sisters, had introduced him to the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, it had awakened or reawakened in Malcolm something that was there. And so, so he and Robert Williams was trying to create a philosophy, create an ideology between the mixture of the two, involvement in American politics that addressed Black people, that affected Black people. Like I always say, even if you don't get involved with politics, politics get involved with you. At the same time, from such a way that it inevitably, or I'm not going to say inevitably, I'm going to say inevitably, everything is going towards our self-determination, that we're working towards these things to be able to defy and determine our own destiny, our own future, and what it looks like, what the outcome of that should look like. So it says, while Malcolm later in 1964 advocated armed self-defense against racist groups, Robert F. Williams practiced armed self-defense against the Ku Klux Klan from 1957 to 1961. So it says, well, Malcolm later advocated it in 1964, armed self-defense. Robert F. Williams practiced armed self-defense against the KKK from 1957 to 1961, and later in 1964 to 1968, advocated mass collective violent civil disobedience to bring forth the potential of a minority revolution. This is Robert F. Williams. I believe this is after he had went to China. This is when they was really looking for him. Listen to don't think revolution just started with our dear brother, Dr. Huey P. Newton, or for some of you, Dr. Malik Zulu Shabazz. Don't think revolution just started. Robert F. Williams, we're talking about, it was an advocate of armed self-defense, an advocate of self-determination, radical reformist, worked with the first development of the Black Panther Party, Lowndes County, Alabama, Stokely Carmichael. Back then, go listen to the developments of the Panthers. I did a series on it. So Robert F. Williams is not new to this. He's no stranger to danger. He's been advocating armed self-defense since 1957 to 1961. Says he comes back later in 1964 to 1968 advocating, check out, dig what he's advocating mass, collective, violent, civil disobedience to bring forth the potential of a minority revolution. Wow, that's some heavy stuff. This is right in 64 to 68. This is right at the signing of the civil rights bills. Are you still in wonder why these white boys acted so quick? They had just killed Kennedy. They had just killed John F. Kennedy for entertaining the thought of messing with these Negroes. Yet, when you had, I think what ended up happening when you have in this era, 64 to 68, when you have in this era someone like Robert F. Williams that had been to China, that has the revolutionary know-how, that has the clout, that has the pull, that has people listening to him, advocating for a minority revolution, I think that you will settle for the alternative. I think you will settle for the alternative. Absolutely. And that is to sign that integration bill. So we find Lyndon B. Johnson signing what they had murdered Kennedy for entertaining. The failure of the urban rebellions from 64 to 68, maybe those were responses. I know we had the uprising in Cleveland. You look at Jersey had the uprising, Detroit, a lot of these major cities, what we would call the uprisings, the urban rebellions, what the oppressor, the colonizer likes to tell you was a riot. But your righteous indignation resonated. It exploded with action. And so these were rebellions. And so the uprising, the people's rebellions of 64 and 68, They failed to produce any consolidated results, tended to prove that a minority revolution was also an impossible revolution. Those rebellions throughout the urban enclaves of Black Africans here in America, though they were explosive and oftentimes destructive, they failed to be consolidated enough. They failed to come together enough. And whatever needed to be birthed out of that consolidation, wasn't able to pull that together, and it proved that a minority revolution at that particular time, a minority revolution was an impossible revolution. Both Malcolm and Williams advocated the organization of independent political action. Malcolm X supported the efforts of the Michigan-based Freedom Now Party and Miss Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Williams stated that the question was neither integration nor segregation, but one of self-determination. You heard that? Robert F. Williams said the question isn't of segregation and integration, but of self-determination. Which one of those philosophies and ideologies would allow us the most realistic chance at self-determination? That's why I am a self-determinist. That's why I'm a Black nationalist, but a self-determinist. That's why. And why in my self-determination, I lean towards separation, because I have understood when we study integration, I don't see self-determination manifesting itself as quickly under integration as it would under separation and Black nationalism. But it does. I don't take away from my integrationist. I believe, like not Dr. Williams, Robert F. Williams is saying here, it isn't about segregation and integration, but self-determination. So you have some integrationists, I believe, possess self-determinist qualities or self-determinist ideologies and philosophies. They just so happen to believe that through integration, self-determination can be had. I'm not one that such as believes that. So we found this profound statement by Robert F. Williams that should really, and it almost should clear up a lot of unnecessary beefs between the various understandings in our nationalist or our self-determination camp. That the question isn't segregation or integration, as Robert F. Williams, Deacon of Defense, has said, that the question is self-determination. Such a profound statement. Malcolm charged that the United States government was responsible for the crime of genocide against the African American people. Both were members of the Revolutionary Action Movement, with Malcolm forming the Organization of the African American Unity, the OAAU, and Williams eventually becoming the president of the provincial government of the Republic of New Africa, free the land. While neither worked out the dialectics of the day-to-day struggle of how to achieve their objectives, their attempted synthesis was an advancement of the two polarities in African-American thought. Dig what just went down. All right? So both of them, this is why I love the works of Dr. Muhammad, Ahmad, again, formerly known to Maxwell, Standford, of the Revolutionary Action Movement, which we're reading right here. We find out that Robert F. Williams and our dear brother Malcolm X were both a part of. And it says that after Malcolm, both were members. First, Malcolm charged. Here's Malcolm's charge. I don't want to be dismissive of anything. Malcolm charged the United States government was responsible for the crime of genocide against the African American people. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with that. That the United States government is guilty of the crime of genocide. I charge, like Malcolm, that they're guilty of the crime, are responsible for the crime of genocide against the African American people. We find that both were members of the Revolutionary Action Movement. Malcolm, though, formed the Organization of African American Unity, the OAAU, and Williams eventually became the president of the PGRNA, the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa. And it says, while neither of them worked out the dialectics, the mathematics, the workings, the dialectics, the scientific workings of the day-to-day struggle of how to achieve their objectives, their attempted synthesis was the advancement of the two polarities in African-American thought, meaning that from, Robert F. Williams, Malcolm X, their synthesis of these thoughts of primitive Black nationalism gave us a modern Black nationalist cornerstone to begin to build on. This is what I'm talking about. This is good. These are good tacticians. This is good strategy. These are good revolutionaries. These are studious revolutionaries. These are people who took these philosophies and studied them. They analyzed them and they realized what was successful or what had the potential for success and looked at the outcome of some of the actions, the demonstrations, you dig, that were actions taking place and the results of those, and they weren't always as advantageous. So they gave us a cornerstone to this new thought. To date, the struggle still continues. To work out a transformational program, one that explains the steps or stages to advance democracy and to achieve the long-range goal of national liberation. The leadership of the Black Panther Party made an attempt at this process in the late 1960s and early 1970s, but was set back in its premature confrontation with the police apparatus of the state. That's something important to listen to. That is something important to listen to. That the Panther Party made a real run at it. They made a very strong contestant to be this program, this transformational program for the African American to evolve and advance into a more democratic and righteous, advanced democracy. And it said that the doctor says a premature confrontation with the police cut that short. Heavy. We're going to stop there. We're going to end it there. So when we come back with part 4, man, listen, like always, I appreciate everybody hanging out with me, listening in, checking out on our political education. I'll come back. You know what? I think I'm going to come back tonight, but I think I'm going to come back with just a kick it session. Let's find out what's going on. Let's talk shop, man. Let's talk these children. For those of us that have children that are teenagers or going into their teenage years, do you know what they're talking about? I mean, man, really. And these dances, they're sturdy. Have you guys heard of the sturdy? The dress codes, just to me on television and their music and videos, the over sexualization. Yeah, let's rap. Let's have a rap talk tonight. So, but until then, man, I see you. Salute everyone for hanging out. You know how I do. All power to oppressed people, African power to an African people, and Black power.